opening up the Zoom, Tina. I appreciate it. And we're starting a little bit earlier than normal. So I'll call us to order. We just heard Ken can hear and be heard. Bernie,
Present.
Meg,
I'm present. In what sense are we earlier than usual?
Raphael,
Here.
Andy.
Here.
Great. So get us started. So basically, first short update for the committee is that we have changed how we post stuff. So that basically we are supposed to send everything to Athena at once. So that means sending me anything you'd like posted in the packet 48 hours in advance. And then I can send Athena that and post in the packet. One change I've made is to make it a PDF document, the agenda itself. So folks who want to access it in that form online can do that instead of using the town website. And then the only other announcement that I have is we are not participating in the counselor program that GOL sent us. So those are the updates as of now. We'll approve the minutes, which, given the new system, which is hopefully working well, they are in your packet. So I'll make the motion to approve the April 24th minutes. I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Meg. Any discussion? Nope. Great. We'll move to voting. Bernie?
I was absent, so I abstain.
Great. Myself, I'm an aye. Raphael?
Yes.
Meg?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Thank you. And then we'll move to the May 8th, and Ken, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. And then we'll move to the May 8th minutes. I believe Ken edited those, so the updated version should be in your packet. Is that correct, Athena? It's been updated?
I see it.
Yep, it should be in there.
Thank you. So I'll make the motion to approve that set of minutes. Can I have a second for the May 8th? Second, thank you, Bernie. Any questions, discussion? Nope, we'll move to voting. Myself, I'm an aye. Meg?
Yes.
Bernie?
Yes.
Raphael?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Excellent. So now we'll move to public comment. Oh, Ken, sorry, I just don't see you on my screen. So
That's
makes
all right. I did all that work with AI to make those minutes. I figured I could get a vote, but that's okay.
Sorry. Excellent. Meg, go ahead.
Before we go much further, could you remind us who's taking minutes tonight?
Yes. I believe that it's Andy's turn to take minutes. Is that all right, Andy?
Okay.
And also, just for the heck of it, who's next? I'd like to get
Who's next after that? I believe that it's Meg, but I'd have to double check.
figures. I knew I was coming up soon.
Okay.
Could you let me know, because I like to come.
No problem. So I see 4 attendees in the audience. And I would like to allow people to come in for public comment. So I'll allow you to speak for 3 minutes. We may engage in a slight dialogue, and that would be within the 3 minutes. And you can raise your hand on Zoom or press *9 to be led into the meeting for public comment. So time is now if anyone would like to raise their hand and make a comment. Okay. I see one person, Nina. Nina Macon. Please come in to the room and
Hi, everybody. I'm not sure you can hear me. I can't see if I am. You can hear me though, right?
we can hear you.
So I wasn't prepared right now to make a comment, but I'll make a general comment about I'm here representing a number of parents. I'm the only one who could show up tonight, but I think there'll be more people next week who are who work a lot with the schools, and we are generally concerned about what we see as lack of transparency or maybe lack of functionality as the charter is designed to create collaboration between the school system and the town, so that some of what we experience as conflict and siloing in that particular way between those departments, we think potentially could be addressed through this charter review process in terms of looking at calendar for when budgets are presented, how communication happens, making sure that there's communication between the branches of government that's actually codified in this document. And we're hoping that that would create more trust and transparency between our citizenry and our elected officials. We're particularly concerned about not being able to look at granularity and budgets, and feeling like there's not a collaborative process to create support for our schools. And we'd like to see that happen through this process.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comment. I'd love to invite you to the forum on the 29th as well. I won't be there, but it would be a great opportunity to discuss this.
I think we'll have a few more people there at that
Awesome.
meeting. Great,
Great.
thank you.
Meg, do you have a question for Nina?
Two quick things. I'm not sure the forum on the 29th is going to happen, but we'll very soon be publishing the schedule. But I'm curious, Nina, not necessarily now, but soon, if you have specific suggestions for language and how to address what you're talking about, which I think is super important, that would be helpful.
Yeah, this is for Nina as well. There'll be a session on the 10th. The one on the 29th won't happen. If folks read the notes that Meg sent out, those details were in there. But thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. So yeah, if you all wanted to come on the 10th, I will be able to make that, and we hope to have you there. So thank you. Any other comments? Raise your hand or press *9. Seeing none? Okay, great. I'll move us along. I've been asked by Meg and Andy to have each committee's update at the start of the meeting. So first we have outreach subcommittee, and then we have the feedback subcommittee updates. So I'll hand it off to Raphael if you want to give an update on outreach, and then I'll hand it off to Andy to give an update on the feedback subcommittee.
So what I would say is there's a document that you all had a chance to review. It's updated a bit. Meg and I could send that out to the whole committee. The update in that document includes details about Crocker Farm. We're getting some support from the director of facilities to figure things out. I think what's most important to know is the first session will be virtual. It'll be on June 10th. There is a proposed sort of approach for these listening sessions. If you have feedback, it would be great to get that. We're also hopeful that everyone in this committee can be involved if they can. It will be good to have you in that space. But the subcommittee members will be sort of facilitating the overall session, but it would just be great to have folks here in those sessions. So again, if you've reviewed that document and have feedback, that would be great. If you've looked at it, we're doing some stuff at the beginning in terms of framing what these listening sessions are about, what this charter committee's charge is. There's some guiding questions for the facilitators. So I don't know if folks had a chance to review the document. If you have, we're willing to field some questions now. Meg, anything else to add?
I've make it a little stronger about participation. I'll be the bad cop this time. We hope that we will have at least 3 members of the Charter Commission, the Charter Review Committee, at each session in addition to the outreach committee. So you might facilitate the small groups and have that opportunity to hear what people are thinking. And the small groups will enable follow-up and what did you mean and what about this? And could you be, so that we're really clear about what we're hearing. Also in the updated memo, which I sent to Athena, but I didn't send it to everyone, but I could do it. Actually, Athena can advise, can I send it right now with the meeting going on? Maybe that's kosher with OML. We outline the materials we want to produce before the sessions that we'd have available as either handouts or slides. And some of those will need your help. Some of them will be the work that some of you are doing. So maybe Athena, can I forward that now to everybody, or that we're in a meeting? I was helpfully reminded that I shouldn't have sent that first version out to everybody. So for the second version that had Raphael's and my, the biggest, just detailed list of what we want to prepare for these sessions is in the second version, not in the first.
I would say though, Meg, I don't know if we want to sort of carve out time now for folks to review. I don't think we have,
No,
Meg, but I think
Yeah.
like if folks could check in with us about
right.
their thoughts about the plan, how they could support, that would be great.
Yeah.
I think what we're wanting some additional insight about is, or thoughts about is like how to collect that feedback to bring back to the committee as a whole.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely. And the other, how do we have some ideas on how to do that, and you'll see our debate, we're not clear. So that's why the more of you who can attend these, there'll be the more people listening and using human brain power rather than technology to document what we're hearing. I have to say, I haven't heard anything about the agreement with the Survival Center, and I got a little bit of a heads up that it may be problematic because it's not a town facility. And our budget doesn't even have $150 to pay the cost of a staff person coming to be there because they're not open. A staff person would have to be there, and that would be $150. It's hard for me to believe. I offered to pay that myself just because all of us working so hard to make these things happen, $150 is nothing. But apparently that's, so I'll just say the Survival Center isn't confirmed, and it's been now over 2 weeks that we've been waiting to hear, and we want to announce them all at once. So, and we really want one in North Amherst. So I don't know if Athena's there, but it's
I'm here.
Oh, so do you have an update on the Survival Center agreement?
The committee still does not have an appropriation. The committee asked the council for an appropriation for the Collins Center consulting, but the committee hasn't asked for any other appropriations. So you don't have
So
funding.
is that what's holding it up? Because what I heard earlier is that it should be in a town facility or something, but if do we need, this is important, if that's what we have to do, ask for $150. And if that's the case, we should ask for some larger amount, because this may happen again, that we want to have food, or we want to have technology that costs something. We just don't have any budget for that. And if that's what's holding us up, minimally, we need to ask the council for 150 adjective deleted dollars.
So there was a conversation earlier on in the process about an appropriation request, and the committee determined that the best course of action at the time would be to request the appropriation for the Collins Center and not for the other activities that the committee was looking for. I think Julian, you can help refresh my memory if I'm getting this wrong, but my recollection is that the committee asked for a number of dollars, and the town manager asked for a little bit more of an explanation about how those dollars would be spent, and potentially some input from our comptroller to make sure that they would be spent, or they were being proposed to be spent in a way that was legal. And then there was no further
I
action
believe I brought that back to the committee and the
About that
committee
request.
decided to wait on that and just do our Collins Center request and not that other request, given that the committee didn't want to be as detailed as the town manager was requesting, I guess, was my understanding, but I'll call on Marcus and then Andy, and then go back to Meg if we want to.
We go back to Meg if we want to.
Sorry, no, we'll go back to you, don't worry.
Sorry.
Meg, I was just curious, have we reached out to the North Amherst Library? Because they got that new room at the back there, right?
They will not let us use it if they're not, it's not when they're open.
Okay,
One, number two, it's not big enough. It only has 21 chairs. Uh, Number three, there aren't small tables, although we could sit around in clusters of chairs, but it's really not big enough. And it's also, it was the first place, they won't
Okay.
allow public use. And they also charge money if you're not the town. And I thought, we are the town. But
yeah.
no,
That's good.
that's our first try. The other options in North Amherst are the Cherry Hill Co-housing Community, and they charge something, but we could probably talk them out of it.
And
But this
then
is all
the
more
church,
time. Pardon?
Right? The Korean church on the corner there where they do the voting.
Yep, we've, that
Yeah.
community space hasn't been available, although we have a great relationship with them now, and it might be that we could use that space. We haven't explored that yet,
Yeah,
but this is
okay.
all holding up,
Yeah, right.
announcing all
right.
of our listening sessions. And we could cancel North Amherst, but that's a shame,
Right.
given that we have approval to use a perfect space. And there's a Survival Center staff person who's agreed to come that day. And they have the small tables, they have the parking, it's perfect.
I mean, we could always also just ask UMass too, I guess. It's north-ish. It's like if we get somewhere reasonably close. Oh, sorry, Raphael.
But whatever we get, it holds us up.
Absolutely.
I think others had their hands up though. I don't want to.
Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
have my hand up, sorry.
Andy, go ahead.
No, that was my question about the North Amherst Library.
Great. Raphael?
Yeah, I think I've proposed we just begin by advertising the launch of the June 10th event. There are a lot of things to figure out. Their
Yeah.
insurance matters. I know, Marcus, you just recommended UMass, but I think there are fees and costs for all of it. Copper Farm has a fee. I did reach out to the chair and say perhaps we need more clarity about this element in terms of funding, requests for funds. So that's an issue we need to sort of be clear about before we move forward. But I think in the meantime, we need to move on advertising the first event, which is virtual, perhaps figuring out the other elements later on.
Okay, yeah, I would tend to agree. Meg, you'd had your hand up for a while, so go ahead.
Well, no, I spoke, but I'll just say, I propose, I want to move that we ask for $2,000 for costs related to events and hospitality, but we don't have to do it right now, but I think we should line up $2,000 for this kind of thing. So we're not going back for 150 now and 200 then and blah, blah, blah. Think big.
That makes sense to me. Marcus?
Yeah, sorry, I think that's a great opportunity for like the 48-hour section. Whatever. I was also thinking Wildwood is probably another potential for a North Amherst area too. So it's one of the schools, one of the town schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a good idea. Andy?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we can advertise more than one session. We could put the North Amherst toward the end and say our first 3 sessions are blah, blah, blah. And then, whatever, just to get that on people's calendars.
Yeah. Marcus, do you still have your hand up? Or did you just?
Oh, sorry.
No problem. Raphael?
Yeah, Andy, the plan was to have all of them sort of figured out by now, but there's some sort of figuring things out. The booking of schools is different now. held and one person is handling it, or the facilities department, and they will get back to me to let me know like how things should proceed. There's issues connected to insurance, and also costs. And so we'll have that information soon.
Meg?
The schools also have a charge.
They
We
do.
might not have to pay it, but this thing about having enough money so that a small amount of hundreds of dollars or something doesn't hold us back seems to me really important.
And I think that
And I
they,
saw add that Banks was a cinch to book.
Mhm.
This woman, Diane, who's there, she's just made it happen in one phone call.
I don't want to take up too much of the,
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff we'll handle. Any questions about the document that Meg shared though? About what was shared there? You, again, you could always share later if folks don't have.
Okay, the document that I have is dated May 18th, and there's a newer one, correct?
There is.
Okay, if the new one can be posted to this meeting's page on the website, as well as sent to us, I'd appreciate that.
Okay. Okay.
that would be great.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you.
I sent it
Meg,
to
can you
Athena,
send
but
that- Meg, can
I
you
s-
send that to everyone?
yep,
All right.
right now.
Any other questions? on
Thank
that
you,
one?
everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, it seems like you guys had a quick, nice meeting. I watched it last week. And I unfortunately did not have time to watch the feedback subcommittee update. But I read the minutes that you had, and it seems like you had a good first meeting. So Andy, if you want to kick that off, that'd be great.
Before we jump to Andy though, like Julian, in terms of the money element, how should we proceed? Should we check in with you?
I would say that we should see if we can find places that aren't going to charge us, but if we can't, that we can go ahead and vote and make at our next meeting an appropriation request. I would say if you can midweek figure out like, okay, is there enough venues that we could find that don't cost anything? I'm thinking like a public park, church, etc. And if that's not possible, to then, from a charge perspective, come back to me and I can draft another request. I just think that that request might take an amount of time to go through that isn't feasible with when these dates are. So, like, I'm thinking of like the Mill River Pavilion, the South Amherst Church, etc. That that we could use for such an event without much of a problem. Andy?
I I think we should we're going to need some money. I mean, we can't run this thing with no resources. So I think we ought to try to put together a budget that says, we're going to have X number of sessions, and for each one we're going to need, potentially this number of or money for securing space, money for refreshments, money for supplies, markers, and flip charts and things like that, and get that moving, because we're going to need it. I mean, we can't just be,
Nickel and diming.
depending on the kindness of strangers. I think we need to have a budget, and it's not like we're asking for a lot, but I do think a $2,000 budget, broken into a couple of categories that make sense, would be fairly easy to put together.
Yeah, I'll say I agree. I think at our next meeting, I'll bring a request forward for us to have like a detailed $2,000 budget. And I don't see any problem with that. I just think that the amount of time that it takes for that to get through the town manager's office, get to the town council, etc., we may need to work out something for one or two events in the meantime, whether that means moving them virtually, moving to a public park, etc., where it's possible to do it rather than rescheduling the events and using it sort of as another delay. Meg?
Two things. I think planning an outdoor session is disrespectful of the people who would come, because it's so dependent on weather. It would mean we can't, it would completely limit recording and all technology and posters, and distribution of materials, but if that's what it comes to, I think that's what people will remember about our process. I wanted to propose that we agree, if it's possible, to approve a budget in the next 5 or 6 days that two of us would put together in the next 24 hours. I'd be happy to participate in that. I don't know if we can approve something by email, but I don't think if we wait 2 weeks to approve it, you're right, we won't get this money until August. I think we're dealing with a somewhat of an emergency.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. That's why I was trying to.
Yeah,
say
I don't know, can we approve something, or to say we approve a $2,000 budget, the details to be worked out in the next 48 hours by two people who agree to do that? I don't know if that's legal. But there has to be a solution to
Yeah, I
this.
know. I think that's a great idea, Meg. I honestly wouldn't have a problem with it as long as it's allowed. Andy and then Raphael, and if that's possible with Athena, that would be great.
I would suggest that maybe we look at just if the bank center is easy to schedule things at, everybody knows where that is, there's parking. Why don't we just schedule things for the bank center?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah,
Okay.
that makes a lot of sense. Raphael?
And I'm gonna just be aware, like we have 3 sessions that are good to go. There's a virtual session on the 10th. The Bangs is booked on the 18th, and then we have another virtual session on the 25th. So just FYI for folks.
Okay. Sounds good. So are we gonna be sticking with the Bang Center, or are we gonna want to make a request for that money? I feel like it's sort of an and both situation.
Both.
Andy and Meg, do you want to work on that request for the budget? And
Yeah.
we can book for Bangs if the other places don't work out in time.
Sure.
Excellent. Marcus?
So
Sorry,
I
Athena.
agree.
Marcus, go ahead.
I was saying Athena's first.
Athena?
Just a reminder, we talked about this process some months ago, that the committee is essentially asking the town manager for an appropriation request. He would then, if he agrees to send the appropriation request to the council, then it has to be referred to the finance committee, where Bernie will
Oh.
decide whether he likes it or not. And then and then it has to come back to the council. It needs a public forum before the council can vote. And this is an odd time of year to be putting in an off-cycle appropriation request, because the council is in the midst of the budget review process, which needs to be approved before the end of June. So as folks have already mentioned, the timing is a little bit tricky, and you might not be with an appropriation in your hands until for some weeks. So I don't advise that the committee approve anything outside of a meeting. That should happen in public. And the last time Julian and the town manager emailed about the committee's previous appropriation request, the town manager wanted some more detail than just the dollar amount. He wanted some information about how that money would be spent. So I encourage you to think about what else you might need before your work is done, such as mailers to folks. We can easily work up a price for how much the little postcards that the town sends out for a mailer, if that's something the committee is interested in. Any other printed or marketing materials that the committee would like. It's really helpful to have an idea of how much those things will cost before you make an appropriation request, so that you don't have to come back through the process again, making another appropriation request. It's, like I mentioned, it's a time-intensive process with committees and council time involved and so on. So I encourage you to make a well-thought-out appropriation request.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Marcus?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think to Raphael's point, let's push the next 3 sessions because they're done and I mean, planning wise, they're done and dusted. And then while we're doing that, we can get in with the budget request. I think let's not lose focus on the fact that we've got the 3 sessions coming up.
Meg and then Andy?
So two things. So is the instruction to the outreach committee to schedule more events at Bangs or to go with just 3 at this point? And my second comment, just so I don't have to raise my hand again, is Andy and I, now we have more time because we have till the next meeting, can take into consideration all of these things that Athena helpfully mentioned, like mailers, possibly publicity that we might want to, something in the newspaper we might want to pay for. I mean, we may be looking more like $5,000, but it's still, in a town with a budget the size of ours, $5,000 isn't much. So Andy and I can do that, especially now that we have till the next meeting. Does that make sense, Andy?
Sure.
Great. Anything else on this before we move to the feedback update?
Just that we are likely to have more forums, even if we, once we get past these initial ones, we're going to want to be presenting what, interim results and things later in the summer and early fall and having people get together then. So I think we need to think about, having resources for that as well as maybe mailers or whatever else. So
Absolutely. It should be a comprehensive type request, if that makes any sense. Meg?
Just my question was, are we instructed to cancel the Survival Center? And it's sort of embarrassing because Lev went to a lot of effort to make this work, but I can do it, to cancel it or to keep trying to get permission so we could have it some other time. Is it reschedule or cancel? And the same with Crocker.
we don't have the resources right now. So
Yeah.
Because Raphael and I have both had we've developed
How much
exchanges
is
with these. $150 for
Crocker.
Crocker. How much is Crocker?
Meg, what I would say though is let's try to work on these first sessions. Maybe
Okay,
we bump the Survival Center to later. Maybe we bump Crocker Farm to later. But let's
okay.
begin with these sessions. Bang.
But my question is about the Survival Center, because someone's holding that time
Right.
to work, to show up that
I would
day.
say reschedule is the answer to your question.
Okay,
And my question is, how much is Crocker? How much does it cost to rent?
Crocker's 100 and something.
Okay.
Yeah.
the
Bernie?
same with Fort River.
Okay. Bernie and then Raphael. I was
Yeah,
gonna
Oh, go ahead.
I'm all set, Bernie.
Okay, thank you. Amherst isn't that big a place. So I don't know how much moving around we have to do, for one. And for two, if we're going to be reporting out to the public and holding open sessions with the public to discuss what we've done so far, I think it'd be better to be consistent about where we are, where we're going to do that. So it makes, if the Bank Center is available, it makes sense to peg that as a space that we'll use to do our reporting, if not our listening. And so that people know where to go and how to be present.
Yeah.
And all of this will be, I hope, I think with the Bangs too, we'll have the opportunity to, I'm guessing, we'll have the opportunity to do this virtually as well as in person.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bangs makes some sense given that it's been very easy to work with the town, which we appreciate. Other questions, comments about this before I move us along to feedback update? No? Okay, Andy, you want to take it away?
sure. I thought I would just share from the minutes, since that's our log of what we're doing. Oops, this isn't it. Sorry. Well, this is our agenda for our next meeting, which I guess we can pull from. We could extrapolate from there, but I can go back if we need to. So we met. It was our inaugural meeting of me, Ken, Marcus, and Bernie, and we basically let me stop sharing this. This is a little premature. That's not it. All right. So a lot of the discussion was around sort of what's our role, and our role we feel is basically we feel there's a good symbiotic relationship between outreach and feedback. So outreach brings in the people to give feedback, and then we collect it and put it in a format that the committee and the public can look at and make this, you know, and the committee can make decisions based on it. So we had some discussion about how we would how we might want to categorize the information, and we sort of came to, I think we had two sort of cross-cutting ways of thinking about it. One was to divide up suggestions according to which section of the charter they would refer to the extent that we can do that, and the other was to have a sense of, since we're casting a wide net, which items are, you know, explicitly and you know, definitely charter related, which ones might be more, you know, a question of whether they're rules, you know, council rules or charter, and which ones might be outside the realm of either, but still might be worth documenting. So it's sort of like within each article, we would have, you know, the relevant suggestions that came in. And then among those, we would say, we would attempt to be sort of identifying which ones are specifically relevant to the charter, and which ones might be more suggestions about rules or about other kind, you know, beyond our scope. So that's sort of what we're thinking as an initial setup. And then it was called to our attention, or we discussed that people have been giving, we have sort of the initial list of things that have been brought to you before, the list of 84 items that are in a spreadsheet that that we can start by sorting. But there's also items that have been brought up during public comment during each of our meetings. So we're going to need to go back and collect those and make sure that we're you know, keeping track of those. And then we need to look forward to the outreach sessions to make sure that we have a plan for collecting that information and for then bringing it back to the team. So that, and then also the survey that we're planning to do. So we see ourselves as, you know, dealing with the onslaught of information that's going to be generated by the outreach subcommittee, and we think that'll be a nice symbiotic relationship. So our next meeting is we're going to meet in the off Thursdays, so at 4:30 generally. And then our next meeting happens to be Tuesday, but after that we're going to meet on Thursdays, hopefully. What our agenda at this point is to discuss any input from you folks tonight, plan to collect public comment ideas from prior and future charter review committee meetings, discuss the League of Women Voters report had about 198 submissions for ideas, and it was suggested to us that maybe we should look at those as well as just the report recommendations. So we'll talk about that. And then planning for collecting ideas from the outreach sessions and from the surveys, and then how to organize it for use by the committee and the public. So that's our plan. We'll be looking to meet in the off Thursdays going forward after this Tuesday. And anybody else from the committee have anything to add to that? One other thing that I think we did talk about was that we hope that we believe that the judicious use of ChatGPT or other AI may help us sort some themes and some threads for us to use. So we're trying to figure out how to take the categories in the charter and apply those to the information they're getting to help with the sorting process. But we'll see if that works or if we have to do it the old-fashioned way.
Excellent.
Sorry, as part of the subcommittee, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure if Andy said it or if Julian, if you did, I'm sorry if I'm just repeating this, but Andy was elected chair. I'm vice chair of the subcommittee. And then to tag on to the AI stuff, I mean, yeah, it's hardly a magical wand waving over stuff. You got to do the right prompts. And so it's a total work in progress and we're learning as we use it. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, I've used it and it's not bad for some of those like sort of straightforward type things. It's just a matter of like sort of taking the more analytical stuff and like beyond facts and analysis, sort of combing it over and making sure that those little details are right. Meg?
Just connecting, bravo, great work. What you're doing and what the outreach committee is doing. If you're able to identify topics or questions that come out of what you're hearing that would be helpful for us to focus the discussions, that will move the feedback process at the listening sessions more quickly. So in other words, we're not just a blank slate, tell us what you think, but what about this? What about that? We're hearing opinions about this, so that these sessions can move us along faster. Because we've got an awful lot of information that we've already collected. So if y'all can help us with structuring, especially the small group discussions with specific questions. And I did that today. I'm on a resident advisory committee, and I raised a couple of things that have come up about the committees. And the resident advisory committee is the committee that interviews people with the town manager, people for committees. And I got some good feedback about based on having heard some things about it, and they had a different opinion. So the more we can get specific, concrete ideas that are beyond not just general, we want more transparency. What does that mean? Or we want more meaningful participation. What does that mean? Thank you.
Andy?
I guess I'm not sure how you're structuring the initial outreach meetings. I haven't seen the updated memo, obviously, but
I sent it to you
yeah,
just now.
I haven't
No,
read
no.
it. I haven't
I
read
know,
it.
of course. Sorry.
But,
I know, of course not. Sorry.
But, just it is, if we have until June 10th, I guess it is something that we could add to our agenda or incorporate in our agenda to think about, what we can, any suggestions for small group discussion, or themes that we've seen so far, or things that we want people to react to. But I think that we'd have to bring that back to the full committee to get their approval.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, other questions, comments about this? Nope. Okay. I will move us along. We've pretty much discussed the listening sessions about that for a fair amount. Is there more folks would like to add about that before I kick it off to Collins for sort of our next hour of the meeting? No? Okay. So Athena has presented us an updated and new schedule for the sort of other half of our time here. And the Collins Center is going to be making a work plan based off of it, and has sort of come up with some drafts of a work plan, but it's going to be working more with it once we get that schedule. Can we, I believe it's already been sent to Collins, but can we sort of like approve that schedule or agree so that the Collins Center can use it to make a work plan? If folks have seen it, if folks haven't seen it, we can do this at the next meeting. Meg?
Sorry that I'm going to zip it up after this.
That's okay.
Athena identified the July 3rd meeting as possibly problematic. So could we agree that we're actually going to meet on that date? I can, but I don't know about it. She identified that as a question.
That date works for me. Raphael, others, if you've checked your calendar. If not, that's okay.
It works for me.
Great. Marcus? Andy?
Tell me the date one more time, please.
July 3rd. And Bernie.
I'll be absent.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know yet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine for me.
Sounds great. Awesome. No worries. If you can't make it, that's okay. So other than that, do we want to give a thumbs up to the schedule? Great. And I will pass it off to, so thank you for sending that along and doing that, Athena. I know that was a fair amount of work. And we will move it along. Mel and Anthony, if you guys want to handle that, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Excited to be here again. I'm going to have, I know I've met this group before. I think this will be the first time Mel has been before you, so I'll have him introduce himself in a second. But I just want to start with sort of a bit of an apology. You've been meeting with Pat for the past couple meetings, and there were some documents that she was going to share with the group that we're going to go through today. We would have sent them to you before the meeting to include in the pack, but there's something we got a little mixed up in her handoff to us. So I have the documents. We'll talk about them. We'll go through them during this meeting, and I'll send them to you after the meeting at the end. But just apologies for not having it sort of beforehand. Before we get started, Mel, I don't know if you want to. I think this is your first time before them, so I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, say a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Anthony, and good evening, folks. My name is Mel Kleckner, and I've been with the Collins Center for 3 years. But prior to that, I spent my career as a town manager or a town administrator in Massachusetts local government. And so, been very involved in all aspects of all the things is within your charter and within your operations. And so I'm pinch hitting for Pat tonight, but also will probably be on board for other aspects of the project. So looking forward to working with you all. Thank you.
And just to orient everyone, to give you a little lay of the land, we've got sort of 2 documents that we're going to go through. One is a memorandum about the preamble. I believe Pat would have discussed with you the preamble at the previous meeting a little bit, but we've got a sort of a memo to talk about just some elements of a preamble. We've got some example preamble language to sort of discuss here. And then we've got, we created a annotated version of the existing charter. We're going to sort of walk through that. We're probably not going to go line by line, but we're going to sort of go section by section and just highlight for you some things that you might want to be thinking about as you're considering this review. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Mel, do you want to do the preamble memo, or do you want me to take
Sure,
that?
I can do that preamble memo. I think it'll be fairly quick. So thank you. So this is the memo you will receive, but let me just really briefly summarize it, and then maybe have some dialogue with the committee, because we're prepared to start drafting a preamble. So the Amherst Charter does not have a preamble currently. It is not a legally required aspect of a charter. In fact, it's really the only part of a charter, if it's in the charter, that it really can't be enforced, because it's more about values and a little bit more aspirational than it is about, the town manager shall submit the budget on this date, and so on. So, but nonetheless, the fact that they're not legal does not mean they're not important. Many constitutions have preambles. The United States Constitution has a preamble. Many charters have preambles. And really what they're intending to do is to provide the reader with some value statements about the town, about why there is this charter, and a little bit about perhaps anything unique about the community, about its history, or about the way it's been developed. Sometimes is used as a way to sort of connect the past with the future. And so we like them. We also think it's important for the committee, whether they're included in the charter or not, to talk a little bit about what's important in Amherst. What is the value? What is so essential about Amherst? And what kind of values might be included in the preamble? Length, I think, is an issue. We're going to show you some preambles in this memo. Some are very short and some are very lengthy. I think it's notable that the U.S. Constitution has only 52 words in the preamble, but it's a very powerful preamble, in my opinion. So let's just move up into some of the preambles. I won't read these through because you're going to get them in a memo, but basically it does a couple. In Barnstable, for example, let's look at that as an example. They're
Right.
talking about managing their affairs. They're using the words of honest, forthright, and efficient manner, participation, fully participation, the rights and responsibilities of local government, and independence from the state to give it some local authority, which home rule does in a charter, and then talking a little bit about this why that's important in the conduct of town government.
I think we'd avoid the word prayer, but
Yeah. So that was another thing I was going to mention, Meg, is that, these days it's very hard to develop values that are universally accepted or appreciated. And so you have to thread the needle a little bit and avoid some of those words or some of those concepts that in this day, or perhaps even looking forward, will be controversial and won't achieve what we're trying to do, and that is get a universally felt statement that is worthwhile and helps people understand why there is a charter. It's the first thing that people will read when they read your charter. Currently, there's the introduction, but that's more legalistic. This is more value driven. So there's more. I don't know, Anthony, whether Pat, it was the intent to generate some discussion on this, or just introduce it and then submit the memo and have some discussion later. I don't know what the thought is there.
The group hasn't seen the memo, so we can have a little bit of deliberation here. Again, we've got sections 1 and 2 of the charter are going to be a bit longer, or definitely are sort of a lot longer. But I think it would be beneficial. I mean, you haven't seen all this language, but to sort of talk about some of those elements that Mel sort of highlighted in terms of the community values. I don't think we should spend a lot of time here because we've got to get through the second part, and you don't have the memo yet. But I think maybe if anyone wants to talk, maybe we can devote 10 minutes to just sort of rummaging around what you've just seen. And I believe saw Bernie's hand up first, and then Andy. Or I'll defer to the chair. I apologize for calling speakers.
Oh, that's fine. Go right ahead, Bernie and Andy.
Yeah, Mel, I associate you with Brookline. The thought of having a brief values-based statement for Amherst is sort of mind-boggling. So I would set as a goal that we are no wordier than twice that of the United States Constitution, and that's about it. I was on the part of the committee that went through and reworked the town's bylaws, mapped them to a city form, and the goal of our committee was to eliminate preambles because we never saw them as, and I still don't see them as terribly useful. But I understand that people may want to make a brief value statement, and so for Amherst, again, a brief value statement should be 150 words or less. It's three times the Constitution.
Andy, I believe your hand was up next.
Yeah, I think we could spend the entire time that we have left trying to figure out a value statement that would not, be objectionable to anybody in Amherst. And so I kind of am leery of spending time on it. I know I could come up with a wonderful value statement that reflects me, but I don't know that, and I would try very hard to come up with one that represents, the wide range of opinions that we have in Amherst. But I'd rather spend the time thinking about the actual charter and how we want to, to improve it in terms of how it functions. I'm not that interested in a preamble.
Okay. And Athena, I see your hand up as well.
Athena, go ahead.
Hi, Anthony. I just wanted to point out that the council has adopted a statement of values as part of their rules of procedure, just as a quick aside.
Oh, thank you. What I'm hearing sort of loud and clear is that we don't have to spend too much more time on this. So I put that on my notes. I'm going to close this. I'm going to move to the actual charter language, unless I hear anybody else just want to share a thought here. That I just want to leave space for a thought. And again, I just want to say, in some ways, this is, I know you guys have been meeting for a while. This is early in the process. Everything that we discuss, it can come up, later if there's a strong sense of the committee to sort of revisit something. And that often happens on these committees. So I don't want anyone to think just because we moved on from something that the book is closed forever on that particular item. So I just want to put that out there as people are sort of mulling over these concepts. So I will sort of take over the conversation on the charter. So let me just shrink this a little bit and make sure that you let me know if everyone can sort of see this document. This is the charter. We've converted to a Word format. And I just want to make sure that people can sort of read through this. We're going to go through this somewhat methodically, again, not word by word, but section by section. And so as the notation sort of states here, and people can probably tell, this incorporation section, I usually call it, it's one of those sections that really is the plumbing of not necessarily the plumbing of your government, but the plumbing of the charter. It sort of spells out how you should understand and how things work together. There's a few highlighted portions here that I'll touch on just to sort of highlight in people's minds, just for people to think about. And as I'm going through it, feel free to stop, raise your hand. Feel free to even shout out if you have something that you want to sort of discuss. So let's say most of this is sort of plumbing, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but some important sections for people to consider are the division of powers, which is an important sort of saying that the legislative powers of the town are going to be focused or embodied in the town council, and the executive powers to run the day-to-day operations of the community are in the office of the town manager. Here, there's going to be much more discussion about both of those positions later on in the charter, but this sort of sets out that, broadly speaking, this is our division of authority here in town. 1.3 is also something that is important, but can sometimes sort of be overlooked in the sense that while municipalities are an extension of the state government, they have been granted through the state constitution some of their own inherent authority we call the home rule powers. And so we recommend in most charters, and we were part of the committee that created this one, to sort of loudly sort of exclaim that in your charter, that we are fully embracing all of our home rule authority. And so that's what section 1.4 does. Section 1.5 sort of just talks about describing the language here, just that, all the sections shall be construed in a broad manner in favor of the community. Section 1.6 talks about independent authority of the community to deal with other entities, other sort of legal entities, including the state, as well as sort of other cities and towns. And I thought it was here, or maybe it's later on. Let me see. So one sort of unique thing about the town of Amherst is that while you chose, when you adopted this charter and changed your form of government from what it had been to remain to be called a town, you're legally defined as a city, because all cities under the sort of what we group as cities under sort of state law are any municipal entity that operate under a council form of government, regardless of who the executive is. So you've chosen to be called a town, but you are in many ways, you're operating with many of the legal classifications of the city, which includes that Amherst no longer has to submit its bylaws to the Attorney General for approval.
Just a bit of history. We noted that there were several other towns, including Greenfield nearby, that when I was on the Charter Commission, and Meg and I were, there were several other places that wanted to remain their town identity, even though they were a city form of government. So it was a city known as the town of Amherst and city known as the town of Greenfield.
That's correct. Yep, that's correct.
Yep.
And again, I'm going to skip over this pretty quickly. There are a couple points that I'll sort of just raise here. Oh, I'm sorry. I see Bernie's hand.
Yeah, could we go back to 1.6? That is going to, it may become more important, or may demand some attention as we go through, because as we heard from the at the start of the meeting, there's some concern about the school system. Well, we actually have a regional school. So it's, dealing with a regional school is basically an intergovernmental relationship. And So that'll factor in discussions, if not actual action at some point or another, because the charter does mention the library trustees and does mention the school committee. But the main action, if you will, in terms of budget debate and the like, is between the towns, plural, the 4 towns that make up the region, and the government, which is the regional school.
That's a good point. Sort of not to sort of douse cold water there, but I think sort of one thing to consider is that as members of a regional school, in many ways, I don't want to sort of oversimplify this, but in many ways, it's a relationship with external bodies. Sort of, the charter is going to talk about Amherst, in your agreement for the regional school system is kind of external, and so there can be some things we do in the charter around the usually be around electing the members to the regional school district, but there's a little we can do to modify the structure of the regional school system inside of the charter. So I just want to be upfront about that.
And I think that's an important qualification that people need to keep in mind as we move into these discussions. That you really have it's an intergovernmental relationship. We can't change the charter of the regional schools, and the regional schools can't change the town charter, nor and there'll be limits to what we may do. They also operate on their own schedules in terms of budgeting, and so we want to keep that in mind, I think, as we go through and hear from people and have these discussions. So thank you, Anthony.
Yep. I'm gonna skip over most of these definitions, but I'll sort of scroll over them slowly unless somebody wants to call something out. But some things that we highlighted were there's a specific definition in here about full town council. Sort of the summary of this is that the full town council is everyone who's elected to the town council, even if there's a vacant seat. That is, somebody, God forbid, passes away or they just leave town, something like that. The full town council shall mean, as you look through this document, everybody who is elected and serving on the council. Majority vote defined as all the members present at a particular meeting, with the important caveat, unless a different number for a majority vote is defined by state law or the charter or bylaw. So there are state laws, I'm particularly thinking of zoning, in which you're required to have a vote of the full membership of the body. So that would trump this definition here. And then quorum, again, pretty much the standard definition that the quorum shall mean a majority of all seats on any multi-member body, even if one or more seats is vacant. So I'm gonna, again, unless there's any questions or anyone wants to stop, I'm gonna sort of skim over the rest of these definitions. And where we get to really some meatier discussion points, and we actually did see in some of the responses to the public input session. So some of those public input points would be covered here. So I'm going to go through this a little bit more slowly. And again, feel free to jump in here and sort of add some questions. So this because you're living there. You got a 13-member council, 3 members to be elected at large, the remainder to be elected from the wards or from the districts. You've got 2 members elected from each of the 5 districts in Amherst. And you've got a term of office. Each member shall be serving on a term of 2 years to beginning the first Monday of January until their successor has been sworn. So some of the things that we gleaned from the public input, and I'm assuming maybe from some earlier conversations with this committee, is that there's an interest in perhaps lengthening or staggering the terms. I'll sort of let you know that there's definitely some implications there, because if my memory serves, your elections are in November, and the state is very jealous of the November election date in terms of state elections, and as well as the federal presidential elections. So I'll actually stop here for a moment to see if there's any discussion just here. Andy.
I'm curious. I'd seen in I think there was Chelsea had a a charter review where they voted on whether they could whether they wanted to shrink the size of their council from 13 to 9 or something like that. And is that something we can even do in this committee? Because I'd be interested in talking about it if we can, and then I'd be interested in hearing more about if there, if there are any ways of getting to 3-year terms or for us, because the 2-year terms where you end up voting for everybody at once, and it's a very cluttered ballot.
We can look into the Chelsea. I just don't remember off the top of my head what, if anything, happened in Chelsea. Mel, if you remember anything, please.
They didn't actually end up approving it, but they had language that they were pushing.
Yeah. And with regard to the I actually didn't look at the charge of this committee before we started. My understanding from the charter section where you're doing your periodic review is that you can propose anything. Now, a change to the terms of office, the number of members or the terms of office would have to be approved by the state legislature, so it would go up in a special act. But you were operating under a special act charter really anyway. So really, well, let me make it simple. Any changes regarding the size in terms of the council would have to be approved by the council and as a special act and sent to the legislature for approval, and potentially voted on by the residents sort of at the end to make it effective. With regarding changing the length of the terms or staggering the terms, I would say anything is possible, but if you were to stagger the terms or if you were to stagger the terms, let's remove changing the length of the terms, just staggering them, because you may have terms end on the years of a president or the state. You would have you probably have to move to a spring election. You probably wouldn't be able to have a November election anymore. You probably have to move to a spring election. So all the towns that have staggered elections are towns that do their elections in the spring. Mel, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, that's right. The state Secretary of State and very protective of the November state and federal elections that happen every other year, and so you just got to stay away from that. There's just no town has been successful in using that date for their annual election.
Yeah, Bernie, I saw your hand. Then Meg, and I know that when you guys adopted this charter, there was a lot of sort of wrangling at the state because it did happen on a state election. That there's just that the Secretary of State is very much sort of opposed to having town elections on the same time. But I'm sorry, go on, Bernie.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is we're no longer a town, and it is the towns that have the spring elections, and it is the towns that have select boards that have 3-year terms. And so it's unfortunate that we have some restrictions on when we can hold elections, and that we have 2-year, because I really think a 2-year term is much too short. You get into a sequence of counselors, as soon as they're settled in, they have to run for reelection. And that's an uncomfortable kinds of thing. A 3-year term, a 4-year term would actually be preferable in my humble opinion, but and maybe more workable than a 3-year term, because then we could keep the November election going. Also, having the prospect of having the entire council turn over at once while it's remote, it's still uncomfortable as well.
Oh, Meg, please go ahead.
So can 3 things. Can a city have elections in the spring? Can a charter review process change the length of the terms and make them staggered? So there are 3 things I'm asking. Move the elections to the spring, stagger the terms, and make the terms longer.
Is
that something only a town can do? Or I'm getting confused about town versus city.
Oh, so the short answer is yes. I'm not aware of any, I'd have to do some, we've got the town, the the city known as the town of, so I have to sort of just parse through and remember those.
Yeah,
But
get that.
every there, the short answer is yes. So you could say that you want your counselors to have 3-year terms, and you could say that you want them to be
Or 4.
staggered. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, 3. I'm saying whatever the number is. You can propose a new number, and you can have them staggered, and you can have them in the spring. Now, if you were to have odd year terms or terms that might interfere with or fall on a state or national election, then you would have to have your elections in the spring. I mean, if you want to get this charter past the state, we highly recommend that you do that.
So cities can have elections in the spring.
You can,
Not
yes.
just, okay, because that has some advantages that in that new counselors would come in at the end of the budget process rather than in the middle. And some of them don't know a lot about budget processes right in the middle of the, the advantage of spring elections is that they come in after that's over with pretty much.
I'd be curious, Melody, I don't know do you have any thoughts on coming in the spring in terms of budgetary understanding? I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Well,
that actually hasn't been something we talked about before.
Well, first of all, I would want to confirm, I think the answer is yes to all those questions. We're really talking about a special state law. And so if the town wants it, and there's really no major impediment with other state laws, I think they would go with it. Having the elections in the spring, you used to have them, so I think how it impacted with your budget process. It can be a little tricky there, but you kind of have to just map it out and see what works for you if you want it in the spring.
But it's trickier if they come in January because it's underway. Sorry to interrupt. I apologize.
No, you didn't interrupt. It's tricky either way. I mean, I think there's issues either way. So what I would suggest is you sort of map out what's going on at that time of year and make sure that you do it in the most advantageous way possible.
Yeah, because elections in the town form of government, elections are actually part of town meeting. And so typically, by the time you get around to holding an election, your budget is done.
Right.
And the new select board comes in or changes in select board to happen after the budget's been finished. So that's something we'll have to look at and debate as to, and there's also particular requirements in the city form for the manager when the manager submits a budget to the council. So we've got some other mechanics I think we have to worry about if we're going to look at changing the election date. It won't be as simple as it might seem. And frankly, I know of no city in Massachusetts that has spring elections. Now that could be because most of those cities were formed under the old laws where you had 4 prototype charters and you picked one. But I don't know of anybody who's advocated, and I wasn't on the Farm of Government Committee for MMA for long, as managers for long, just a couple of years. And spring election for a city never came up as a question or an option.
I see, Andy, I see your hand up. Before I go to you, the other thing I just wanted to share with the group, and really, I guess it's in some ways the benefit that you're doing a relatively recent charter review for a charter that was adopted recently is that most people are really used to going to an election in November, right? That's when the big presidential one is, those things. So you may want to take a look as you consider that the turnout for your elections in the spring versus what the turnout had been since you turned to the new charter, so one of the things that we hear people are very interested in is making sure they get the biggest turnout, and that sometimes can be a real benefit of the fall election. So that's just something to sort of chew on and that you may have data for. So apologize for that. Andy, please go ahead.
Yeah, that was part of the thinking that went into moving to November elections, at least among them, the majority on the commission. But you run into the issue of having a very crowded ballot when you have 2-year terms and everybody's up for election at the same time, and you've got 13 positions on the council and 5 on the school committee and 6 on the library trustees, it's it's pretty unwieldy. So, you know, one way to go would be to have 4-year terms and stagger them and keep it to November. But then another would be to try to do them in the spring with 3-year terms. But yeah, I wasn't aware that we could even do that. I thought I remembered that you know, if you're doing the council form of government, you had to have your elections in the fall, but I didn't realize that was a possibility.
There are some, you know, it's typical that the cities want to be in the fall, but there are a few. Typically, the towns that turned into the cities recently tended to be the ones who kept their spring elections. But we'll do some more research on it.
But
Yeah, thank you. Meg?
Amherst voted to have them in November, but not when there's a presidential or congressional election, because we have so many students who turn out for that. We didn't want them distorting our local voting. So in fact, we have November elections, but not on those even years when it's a congressional or presidential election.
I have a comment to make, but go ahead, Andy.
My sense was that we did have an election about the charter in a November election, and people had to choose a separate local ballot.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people from out of town or temporary residents picked up that ballot.
Right.
But, I mean, they're constituents too, so it's
right. But the elections are off years.
I'll have my own comment, which is I sort of feel like it almost would make sense to have the local ballots on at the same time as the national ballots. I don't know what the legalities are around that, but it might be something that would allow voters to be like, even if, sure, they might be an uninformed voter, but I'd rather have more people have that opportunity to get involved. If they're like, hey, I'm voting for president, but I could also vote in these local elections. Like, I feel like having that ability for folks, opening the door to people to getting involved if they want to, without making a separate trip, sort of feels like an advantage to me.
Well, we don't disagree necessarily, but our point, I guess, is that the Secretary of State does. And so you might want to talk to your legislator to get a little bit more background about that. But to our knowledge, other than, some special election that involves, 2 ballots on the same day, they don't allow you to have your local election on that same ballot.
I see. Okay. Huh. Interesting. So they don't let you have it on the same ballot, but would they allow you to have 2 different ballots on the same day?
I think sort of the route we're talking about, not about sort of a single election, which is where we've sort of, again, this did come up with Amherst adopting this charter. Sort of that's like a one-off, like, hey, we've got this item, we really want to get it voted on, and you get permission from the state, and they said, okay, you can do it, but you have to have separate ballots, separate counting, all that. What we're saying is that if the charter were to go up with the language that you would have your elections regularly fall on the same day as the state or the national, the Secretary of State would then go to the legislature and say, I don't think you should approve this. You would get friction at the state level in terms of opposition to your special act.
That answers my question. Thanks.
And then the other point that came up about the sort of the 4-year terms, that's definitely sort of been a trend for mayors, but there are some city councils, I don't have the names off the top of my head, but there are some who have moved to, and definitely several that have proposed 4-year terms for their councilors. And if you were to do that, you could stagger those terms in a way that you wouldn't sort of interfere with the state or the national election. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but there are not many councils that have it, but there are some. Mel, I don't know if you think of any just off the top of your head. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, not offhand. We'll research that.
If there's nothing else, I'm going to move down. But again, feel free to raise your hand or just shout out. And then again, very common element in charters is just eligibility. It's focused on residency in the town or in the case of the district councilors within the proposed district. And you've got some language here about moving. So moving out of town, you automatically lose your seat. If you're a district councilor and you just move to a different district, you get to finish the rest of your term. But obviously you wouldn't be eligible to run for that same district seat if you weren't in the district the next time the election comes around. And then you have a section here defining the officers of the council. So you've got let me see. So you've got the election and term for the council president and the vice president. You have them serving for 1-year terms, and you have them chosen by the council. And then there's I'll sort of stop here because there's some public input about changing the method of choosing the president and vice president. What I can say here is that most cities, I'm thinking of sort of the most, there's Greenfield, but I'm most familiar with Springfield below you. The councilors elect the president, the president of the council annually. It's sort of, I would contrast that with Cambridge. Well, not even contrast it. Cambridge, the president of their council is called the mayor. They have what we call sort of a weak form of a mayor who doesn't have any sort of day-to-day authority, but they do the same thing. The councilors in Cambridge and Worcester elect the mayor, but it's really the council president from amongst their members. So the method that you have here is the most common in terms of choosing the head of the council. But the suggestion, I guess, from the public input was if you're the highest vote getter in the election, then you get to become the president and vice president, respectively. Again, if you were to move it in the direction of staggering terms, that would complicate this selection because everybody wouldn't be up. So I'll stop there and Meg, please go ahead.
And Cambridge also has a high-paid manager.
Correct.
So the mayor, just what you said, there's a mayor and he's the president. That would be like Lynn would be the mayor, but there's a professional city manager who makes like $250,000 or probably more by now. He's not elected.
Correct. Yep.
What about term limits? Do you see term limits for president and vice president at all in other charters? I imagine one argument is that once you've been a serving president for a while, some of the counselors might be leery about alienating the person who's been president. They don't want to be on the losing side of a vote to try to vote them out. So term limits would allow more turnover.
I have to do some more research there. The closest one I can think of, and I just have to look at it again, is Framingham did have a discussion about the terms or how sort of, I believe, and I just want to double check this, but I believe that Framingham in their charter has a provision that says that you can't run for president or vice president consecutively. But I want to double check to get back to you. I would say that the vast majority of council forms of government, while there may be a term, there isn't a codified limitation on whether or not you can do it consecutively or whether there's a limit. So that wouldn't be a common thing. I see no other hands raised, so I'm just going to scroll down here. So B is also, again, fairly common that the council president is sort of charged with creating the agenda for the council meetings. But other than that, really has the same creating the agendas for the council meeting and presiding over the meetings. But other than that, has no more authority than any other counselor. Interesting thing here that you may want to actually bring in the council president or the town manager to talk about is the state of the town address. So it sort of reads that the council president as well as the town manager really will do some joint address. I don't know if they're doing a joint address or if they're doing separate addresses now, but that annually they'll do this address to the this address about the state of affairs in the town, sort of a State of the Union speech that we think about at the federal level. I'm curious if anyone sort of wanted to provide some color here. Has that been working? Does that happen? Is it a joint address?
Yeah, it is. They do a yearly presentation and it's a joint address and they bring in the council president, the school committee, etc. So basically they have a situation where they give the presentation. Normally they bring everyone in person. The first year they did it, it was at the middle school, and then now they've been doing it more sort of impromptu, but it does happen every year and it's pretty, usually he just says like the state of the town is strong, and elaborates a little, and there's not much else, but it would be nice if we got like, I don't know, an analysis of all the challenges the town faces.
Yeah, so that's something you can sort of think about as we sort of move on. I mean, because we're just going through it, but we're going to come back to these sections. Again, I would just say that the state of the town address, this joint one particularly, is rather unique. So if we move to 2.3, the prohibitions. So A is becoming fairly standard, or actually is fairly standard, and it sort of maps pretty closely to the state ethics law, that they can't hold any other compensated position in town while they're serving, and then a 1-year prohibition, as a former counselor. And then the interference is also sort of very standard across the. Sorry, Julian, go ahead.
I was just wondering, does this and I'll just use myself as an example. In high school, I had a summer job with the town. Does that mean if I wanted to run for town council, I could not legally?
My reading of this is that if you decide if you're an employee of the town in any capacity, that you have to give up that employment to be a town council. Now, I wouldn't say it's unclear, but the way it reads is that you could keep that employment up until becoming elected. Now, I don't know what the practice is here, but my reading of this is that you cannot, if you're an employee of the town, you run for your seat, you become elected, you would have to give up one or the other, regardless of the level of employment. Mel, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yes, that is correct, Anthony. This is not a, it might follow to some extent the conflict of interest law, but this is not a technical conflict of interest issue. It's really a local issue, just deciding, who is eligible, and it's whatever you want it to be. And that's the way I would read it, regardless of the amount of compensation or the level of the position. You would not be eligible to serve.
Because I remember a situation, it was like a principal or a secretary or a teacher of some sort in the Holyoke schools who was elected to their city council, and they said that it all went to court and it was a whole thing. I think this section should definitely be looked at to avoid a similar situation, and also to allow sort of the people who aren't administrating stuff in the town and who just happen to have a job for the town from getting involved. You guys can continue unless there's any other questions.
Oh, okay. Oh, I saw Bernie unmuted.
Bernie? Go ahead.
Real quick, I mean, the standard fix for this is that if you and we had an employee of the schools who was selectman for a while, and basically he received no compensation for being on the select board. So the conflict is when you're getting two incomes from the community. So I would think that if and you also have to abstain from voting on anything in any matter that affects your position. So it's cleaner to say that you can't have a town employee serve on the council. It's not impossible, but to arrange for it. But it's cleaner and it's easier to just have people disqualified if they're an employee.
It just would make honestly more sense to me to have like basically this read, if you're a town employee and you would like to run for town council, you have to give up the town council salary and can keep your regular employee salary and employee job, and you'd give up the like $5,000 or $3,000 or whatever we pay the counselors, which that way there wouldn't be that same conflict and they could still get involved.
Just to play devil's advocate a little
Yeah.
bit, just for people to consider, is that as a town councilor, you're approving budgets, presumably of a department that you're also a member of. So I think, when I hear people talk about this, that's some of what goes into some of that concern, is that you've got a vested interest now in the budget beyond just as an elected official representing, a constituency. So I just want to sort of put that out there. That's something people do say.
And compensation is for counselors is $10,000. So we're a little bit more generous.
Okay. Other questions?
We
Comments?
did get a comment from a counselor about this provision that said, this provision prohibits any part-time employment by a counselor in any municipal department, working a summer camp, lifeguarding, refereeing, recreation department, sports events, part-time library work, substitute teaching from being on the council. It also prevents a library or school department employee from running for council, although they can run for library trustee or school committee, elected boards that have far greater oversight over their employment than the council. Maybe allow part-time employment or exclude library and school employees, or prohibit only those employees appointed by the council or directly reporting to the manager, like department heads. So we have some input on that.
Yeah, I would say I generally agree with what Mandy, Joe, or Counselor Haneke had to say here. That it makes sense to me to say like you forfeit the money for the town councilor's salary, and as long as you're like at a level below that the council doesn't directly supervise, like a department head or a town manager, etc. If you're like a lifeguard, a camp counselor, a school teacher, or a DPW worker or whatever, I don't see why we would prohibit them from getting involved. It's not like they can vote to raise their own salary anyway because they're unionized. So
this is very helpful to go through this way.
Yeah. Marcus?
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious, like, what happens if that employee would earn more as a counselor than they do now? Like, do we say you give up the lesser of your two town salaries, or do we specifically say it's the council one that you give up?
I'm not sure that we need to even prohibit them from taking, either. We could decide to do that, but we don't have to.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just curious.
I mean, if they're like being a ref for recreation, basketball, and they're getting a little bit of money for that, they don't want to give up, the stipend for the council.
Yeah.
Just rely on personal greed. They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I know Mel had his hand up, and just I don't think we should just do any amendments right now, as we're just sort of orienting ourselves. But as you're talking, I'm sort of thinking through, perhaps you can put a cap, maybe a limit. Maybe the limit is, whatever the counselor salary is, or double that if you're earning something like that or higher, that you have to give that up. Or I'm just sort of, as I'm listening to the conversation, or you have some sort of direct supervisory authority. Those are just some I'm thinking about sort of turning your thoughts into actual language that can fit in here, that could be sort of a measurable standard in terms of when this would
Yeah,
apply.
that sort of language makes a lot of sense to me. I would like maybe even something like, if you are a non-unionized supervisory town employee, you are prohibited from from running for council. But if you are like sort of a regular mid-level worker or like a seasonal employee of some sort, you're allowed. I mean, that would make more sense to me.
And Mel, you had your hand up for a while.
No, I think that Julian's right. We'll find, there are language out there that is a little less restrictive than yours. And so we'll find it and provide some options for you.
Great.
All right, so
Thank you.
and I just want to, before I move on to the next one, I just want to highlight that somebody said this is very useful to sort of go through. Like, so I'm just glad we're bringing some benefit to the group. I'm good to see that feedback. So the interference section is also very standard for this form of government. The town manager is running the day-to-day operations. So the council, and this will say this later on, really communicates about what's going on in town through the town manager. So this is actually very consistent with this form of government, this prohibition about interference with the administration. Now, when you talk to counselors, there can be some friction about that, and so depending on what you hear back, you may want to consider sort of what to do here. But I'll just let you know that this is pretty standard in terms of the separation of powers. So the compensation language is also fairly standard. Now here, you've got the council sort of setting the salaries for through themselves through the adoption of some piece of legislation. Sometimes charge will say through specifically a bylaw or ordinance, but this could be either of those, or I guess in this case it could be a resolution or something. Sort of my initial thoughts reading this is that maybe you could tighten it up to say specifically through some sort of bylaw. I believe you call your local legislation bylaw. So that was my only thought is reading through here. And then one of the other things that actually comes from state law, which it seems is actually codified here, is that the council is sort of a body that exists for the period of its term. And so it can't raise its own salary. It can raise the salary for the next council. And so your 18-month sort of break here is really what provides that protection between when they set the compensation and when it can sort of go into effect. But again, this is I don't see any major issues here. So unless there's any questions, I'm just gonna
The only thing that I'll note is we did get a comment about lowering the manager's salary or having like a salary cap or something in what Andy wrote for us. So that might be something that we would consider. I don't know what the legalities are of that, but I know we did get one or two comments about it.
So this is not the manager section. That would sort of go into the manager section, which I think is the next section, section 3.
Excellent. Thank you.
But yeah.
Great.
So 2.5 is, again, it's pretty boilerplate, really just stating that the legislative powers are vested in the town council. This is an interesting one, 2.6, getting into some of the machinations of sort of how the town council exercises its authority. Again, some of this is actually pretty standard. Some interesting things here that I just want to sort of call out for a second is that you've got a definition for quorums just broadly for any multi-member body in town. In your definition section, you call out a specific quorum definition here in the town council section. So just to be aware, I wouldn't necessarily call it an inconsistency. I would just say that you've got the broad umbrella definition for a quorum sort of up in your definitions, and then you've got one that specifically applies to the town council here in 2.6.
It's just doubling up, really.
Excuse me?
It's just doubling up the definitions.
Yeah, in some respects, yeah. And then you've got sort of explaining how the council sort of, again, this is pretty boilerplate. At a minimum, they have to adopt any measure by majority vote. You've got the rules of procedure that the council will sort of adopt them, and you've sort of called out some specific things around meetings, special meetings. Julie, I'm gonna go to you. The only thing I want to just point out is that I I don't want to say I have concerns, but this provision for emergency meeting, to me, sort of reads as redundant in relationship to the fact that you do have this special meeting provision, which is essentially a meeting that's called outside of your normal regular meeting schedules. So I don't know what the thinking was there for having these two provisions, but that's something I just would sort of ask the committee to sort of look closely at. And I'm sorry, Julian, please go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I was just reading this. The regular meetings of the council shall be held at a time and place fixed by measure. I would just say that this is a little bit confusing because we sometimes meet hybrid, we sometimes meet virtually, we sometimes meet in person. So I feel like time fixed by measure makes sense, but place might not.
No, I think
That's all.
that's an interesting one in our virtual world. I mean, yeah. Now, again, you're under. Well, actually, I'm going to write that down to sort of explore it because this is something that's cropping up in our new virtual hybrid reality. So,
Great.
any other conversation on this section as we go through it? Then sort of last one that I would point out is the minutes section. So you've got a sort of definition or requirement for the minutes. Not to say that there's anything necessarily wrong with this, but there's a very, I don't want to say strong, but there's a kind of a standard definition in the open meeting law that are sort of minimum requirements for minutes when they have to be published and things of that nature. So, in some respects, there could be an argument to be made that this may not be as necessary as, it may not be purely required to be in the charter. And then you've got a comment really looking for, it sounds like, sort of more requirements on your sort of meeting minutes and definitions in the town rules. So I will sort of scroll down here. I'm gonna skip over this. It's sort of standard. The town council can create its own standing or ad hoc committees. District meetings, which is another sort of interesting one that's sort of relatively unique, which is requiring that councilors have a minimum of 2 meetings in their district each year open to all residents. So that's, the individual councilors going out there to their districts. This requirement only applies to the district councilors. And actually, I'll just stop here and sort of, I don't know, I mean, I think you haven't sort of formally brought the district councilors or any member of the council before you, but I'm curious, do people have thoughts? Is this working? Is this happening? Are these well attended?
I've been to a few and I like them personally, but that's just my take. Meg? You're muted.
Apparently not all districts are having them. I think there's no consequence of not having one or two. In terms of whether they're well attended, the ones in District 1 have been about 25 people, 30 people. So I don't know whether that's well attended or not. But there's always an agenda and a top, that people come to, and there's sometimes a speaker who presents something related to what's going on. But I understand some districts don't have them at all, I've heard. So there's no consequence of not having them.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
There's no meeting police that comes in and says.
That's an interesting question, actually, Meg, and have no clue. Who enforces the charter? Is it self-enforced by the council? Is it the state? Is it the police? Like, who enforces the charter, the provisions of it?
That's actually a long-standing question. In most cases, it's the town manager and the council that really enforce it themselves. In most of the cases, it's one body enforcing it against the other to protect their realm of influence. That's sort of when most of these issues sort of arise. But yeah, I mean, they're sort of, as you read through these, and I would sort of put some real caution here in terms of vesting rights in perhaps citizens or residents to enforce the charter against certain things, the charter against the government itself. Like, there could be unintended consequences here, but for the most part, the charter, a lot of it is enforced by the council or the manager, sort of in the context of making sure people are doing what they're supposed to do.
I almost feel like we could have like a charter enforcement subcommittee or whatever. But
Really? Charter police.
no, yeah, exactly. Anyway, Andy.
One thing that people have noted is that there's the district councilors have to have district meetings, but there's no requirement for at-large councilors to have any kind of public meetings. So I don't know if that's something we want to address or not.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would say we should look into it. That's certainly interesting.
So we're in sort of our last 10 minutes. I'm gonna speed through these a little bit. The investigation access to information is becoming actually very standard, and this is the mechanism by which the council can really get the information they need to do their job in terms of many ways, in terms of oversight over sort of what's going on in government. So they've got this sort of inherent authority to investigate the affairs of the town, and they can exercise that investigative authority in a number of ways. One is in terms of submitting specific information requests, as well as requiring the attendance of the town manager or subordinates to their meetings. You've also got the council being able to directly sort of bring forward the superintendent of the schools and the library director. The library director, that one is definitely sort of one that I can't think of seeing before. And Mel, I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of the council, because the superintendent reports directly to the school committee. So I guess I'm curious, Mel, if you have any thoughts about the superintendent being able to be called before this city council directly.
It depends. It's been tried, and sometimes the school department or the administrator there will not want to cooperate. But I think in general, it's intended to encompass any aspect of the town government, including the schools, to some level.
And you did have that comments before from public comment about strengthening these the links between the school and the town. So I understand that the tug and pull, but I would just highlight it as being I guess somewhat surprising.
Yeah, that surprises me too, because I had thought sorry to jump in here. I just thought the school committee was the supervisor of the superintendent. I know at one of the recent finance committee meetings, there was an issue where one counselor some of the school committee members felt that a counselor was outside of their bounds, if you will, in asking questions that were more the school committee's responsibility. So I feel like we could spend more time on this to delineate whose responsibility is what, and who supervises who, sort of here. The only other thing that I would bring up is that it says in 2.8, it says that the town doesn't have jurisdiction. The town doesn't have any jurisdiction over the RSC. So I feel like that is also one of those wording areas that should be changed. Like if we want the school committee to be under the town council, then that's different. But if we want it to be sort of a separate body, we should word it as such. Sorry, Andy?
Oh, it's fine. I just, it would be great to know, back before the state's ed reform, school committees could have their own budgets basically, and they could levy whatever was necessary, or they felt was necessary to run the schools under, I believe it was ed reform. The school budget had to be underneath the overall town umbrella, but then we've got a region that we're part of that, but the appropriation toward the region, I believe, needs to be under the town umbrella. So I'm not sure. I mean, you get into turf issues, and certainly the supervision of the superintendent is the school committee's job, and but ultimately the responsibility for the town budget is the council and the town manager's job. So how do those things get balanced out?
Well, there is a section later on. We're going to get into the sort of the budget creation process, and usually the school. I mean, you've got a regional school district, but I'm going to talk from the perspective of a town that has their own school department. Usually the school department budget is an intimate part of sort of forming the town budget. And there's a whole state statute on the school budget and how the city has to incorporate it and what changes can be made and who can make them. But it's usually a fundamental part of the formation of the budget, the annual town budget.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious who is the final decider, and how, ultimately somebody has to come up with a budget that's approved. And, if the school, and I've been on the school committee, I've been on that side of it, but, when you're looking at the entire town, you have to come up with a budget. And so who can the school committee say, no, we want, it's getting late and I can't really phrase this, but I think this question about, to what extent can or should the schools have more power in this than they already do is a question that we're going to be asked.
It certainly is. In fact, it's a question that was sort of already brought up in public comment today. Bernie, go ahead. One question, actually, Anthony, sorry, just to chime in. When was that ed reform, when was that passed to change it from school committee having jurisdiction over their own budget to it sort of being this joint process where they fight over whose jurisdiction it is?
I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on school budgeting, so I don't remember I don't know what the process, but we're looking at more than 30 years ago.
Oh, wow. So before I was born.
It was part of Proposition 2.5 law,
Yeah.
not the ed reform.
Okay.
Back in 1980, 81 or thereabouts. Yeah.
82, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because schools used to, there were two tax, your tax bill would have two lines on it. One would be the town tax, the other would be the school tax. And Prop 2.5 did away with that, as Mel mentioned. We have, if this portion of the charter was written for the town known as, the city known as the town of Hadley, it would work. The town of Amherst has a regional school and has a school union, which coincidentally all share the same person as superintendent. So the superintendent gets to attend 3 sets of school committee meetings. It gets wilder when you get up into the hill towns in Franklin County and you've got, superintendents and school unions with 4 or 5 communities, and the superintendent basically spends her entire time in meetings. I think we need to give some thought about this, because the superintendent is the superintendent of the Amherst schools, which provide education K through 6, but as part of the, and that's an independent group. But that superintendent is also employed by the school union, which has the same arrangement with the town of Pelham. And then you've got the regional school there. So it's messy. I was at that finance committee meeting and bit my tongue, because the finance committee and has every right to ask questions about how money gets spent. I want to separate that. And we talk about how budgets get formed. I want to separate that out. I also want to understand or get a good understanding of the timeframes involved, because the schools have to respond to DESE in terms of what they want. That organization wants its budgets in their timeframes. We have timeframes that are set in the charter and by general law, and the two don't line up. So, and we're not going to probably get them to line up. So I think we need to look at how we can better share information and collaborate on that. So that'll be the challenge going forward. But just so Anthony and Mel, just so you folks are aware that Amherst has got a very different school setup here. It's not the superintendent isn't town superintendent completely. She's shared with the union, school union, and she shared with the regional school.
Yeah, thank you, Bernie. I would just also note that like what I realized that's interesting about this is basically in effect this section allows for the town side of the town budget, EX, police, fire, etc., town hall, to have one review by the finance committee. So they only get reviewed once, whereas the schools and the library get reviewed by the library or the school committee and then by finance committee. So they get double the scrutiny for whatever reason.
I just want to sort of sound just a note of caution here is that we're not in the financial procedures section of the charter. This is just the council's authority to bring individuals before them for questions. So just with that caveat, I just want people to understand. Yeah.
So this is, yeah, I mean, this is, this basically, thank you for that, Anthony. This is basically says that the council has the right to question these people about how they're using their money. And that's, or other matters. And that's where we're at here. We'll get into dancing around with finance in a later section.
So I think you need to go from 6 to 8, but let me just quickly go through. So the notice provision just provides some time for individuals to, well, let me stop here at the notice section. So again, it just provides some time frames so that they can't say that you have to, they can't tell the town manager that he has to be there tomorrow if he's got something here. Just it provides some reasonable time for people to prepare and to sort of know when the meetings are going to be that they're going to have to attend. I can do, I think 2.9, I think it may be the last one, there may be one more. I'll turn over just the committee. Do you want to do this today? Or you want to hold off to your next meeting to go to the next section?
I'd say finish it today.
Yeah, let's finish it. I don't see why not. Go for it.
This is the charter vests the council with the appointment of certain positions. I can tell you that in some manager forms, some of these that are appointed by the council would actually be appointed by the town or city manager. Again, I'm not saying that's the right or wrong. I'm just saying that they've specifically for reasons gave it into the council. So one is pretty standard. The clerk of the council who does sort of the record keeping for the council. They can have any additional staff that their budget would allow, their whatever the budget is for the town council. The councilors appoint the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, which is sort of for this form of government is somewhat unique. Usually when you see a strong town manager, you'll see them making these types of appointments, but this is not, I'm in no way saying that this is not a bad way to go. I'm definitely not saying that. That the council, oh, sorry, Julian, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just noting, I know because my grandmother served on the planning board in Southwick, and that was an elected position. So they had like that is all elected. And I think that's a little bit smaller of a town, but not much. And I just thought it was interesting. I guess we could make those elected positions here. That might be something to discuss.
Well, in towns, definitely in smaller towns, but well, actually the trend is to go to appointed. But if you look at the state statute on the planning board, it says that in towns they shall be elected, in cities they'll be appointed by the chief executive, the mayor. So that's been in state law for a while. When communities transition to cities, they usually go to appointing these boards. Usually that appointment power gets vested with the executive. I will just say that for smaller towns, there's been a trend across the state, sort of a lack of engagement with local government, and so they're having a hard time filling some of those elected positions. So I'm aware of several towns that have made, particularly planning board and zoning board of appeals, appointed positions, mainly because of to make sure that they actually can get people on those seats, and then sometimes there's an interest in making sure that you get the right mix of sort of expertise and land use and things of that nature. But I would say the driving factor for smaller towns to go to appointed is a lack of public participation.
Anthony, you noted that this is somewhat unusual, and this was a discussion that the Charter Commission had, and planning board and zoning board of appeals were seen as making decisions that could be controversial in the town, and the decision of the commission was to put that in the hands of elected officials because for that reason. But it certainly doesn't have to stay that way. But that was the reasoning.
Yeah, I certainly see the advantage to doing that. That makes a lot of sense, Andy. And I would even see the advantage to opening this up to being a sort of third or fourth board election. I don't know, is that legal or is that only allowed in towns to have it elected? Like,
Sorry, Julie, I didn't get the question.
Is an elected planning board, is that a thing that's only allowed in towns that have town meeting, or is that elected in like a city known as the town of government like we are?
You could make the planning board elected. I'd have to do some research. I guess off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any cities that have an elected planning board. Yeah.
Nice. All right, thank you.
Non-voting liaisons to various multi-member bodies. I guess some things that sort of stand out to me is just a little bit weird, and might just be the wording, is that non-voting liaisons to the school committee and the library trustees. I won't linger here, but we talked about how it's a regional school committee. So I don't know if it just means that they're, when I think of a liaison, I'm thinking of sort of an ex officio member, but maybe this is just someone's going to go to the meetings and report back to the town council. Perhaps that's the intent here. Then the suspension or removal of any official that they have the ability to appoint. And then we go into some of the mechanics. I'm sorry, I'll stop here unless there's any discussion here. So obviously there's a comment from the public about just discussing how the appointments are going. The next section, 2.10, is on bylaws and other measures. So the definition of the bylaws and how they can be sort of adopted. I can tell you that emergency measures is fairly common. It's a way to sort of scoot around some of the more involved bylaw procedure in case there's an emergency that needs to be addressed quickly through legislation, where you've got a certain number of, you've got some requirements in terms of milestones, in terms of timing, in terms of number of meetings before a bylaw can fully adopt. And then you've adopted something from, you've adopted from the state law and many of the plan charters, which is in some communities they call it the charter right or something like that, which is the ability to postpone matters that are heard, so there can be no action on the item once a person uses their charter right. And you've got the ability to use it twice if there's a vote of 4 or more members. So one member can charter write something one time, 4 or more members can charter write it again. But once those 2 things have been exercised, it has to go back before the community. I actually would be very curious if people think that is slowing down decision-making, being abused. Sometimes there is a discussion about people abusing this thing called charter right in some communities.
Andy, go ahead, but I have a comment on this as well.
We received some input that is suggesting that maybe we should raise the threshold so that it requires a second, or that so there couldn't be just one person to slow it down.
Yeah, I would almost recommend 3 people, because we've received so much public input on this. I know we've had both a town councilor and a former town councilor bring this up with us as well. And I do remember one meeting where a councilor used their right to postpone, and then another councilor was upset that they used their right to postpone and used the right to postpone on a different matter. And it just feels like it opens us up to sort of games that just prolong the process and don't really help anything.
Yeah. The only thing I would sort of suggest whenever we come back to this to explore it is to continue to require no debate. If somebody raises it, that then whether you require a limit of 4 or 3 or whatever the number is, that there be no debate, so that there can be less slowing down of the meeting in terms of exercising this thing. So, so I'll just sort of give that information to you. Then the town council has the ability to approve or confirm some of the appointments by the town manager, specifically any appointments the town manager has of department heads as well as members of multi-member bodies. And then the town council has the ability to fill vacancies on the council. So if a member moves or something happens, the council will meet. And I'm not going to go through all this sort of timeline things here, but a certain posting, but they have a meeting, there's going to be a certain posting requirement, things of that nature, and the council will vote to fill that vacancy, depending on if it's an at-large position or a district position. There are certain other limitations on sort of obviously where the candidate to fill the position lives. You've got the council president having 2 public forums. Again, this is in many ways, well, I wouldn't say it exactly mirrors the district meetings because you've got some definitions here about what these meetings should be about, the master plan and the budget. And then I believe this is the last one. Yeah, this is the last one. So 14 is, to me, this sounds like cleanup from your previous form of government where the select board would have been the Water or Sewer Commission. And so you vested that authority with the town council. And so that's the whole thing. I'll stop there. I see Julian, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just have 2 comments. The first one is just about the public forums. I think it might be worth us exploring like adding some timing or dates to this just because the budget, like I know I'd personally been told like, wait, actually the right time for input is not in May, it's in November. And like it would make more sense to have public forum heavy November on the budget rather than a public forum heavy May, if that's the better time for input. So that might be something that's worth considering here. And then the town council shall control and regulate the public ways. I don't know exactly how that makes, like what that does, but I remember at the last finance committee meeting, there was discussion about how like the complete streets and such sort of slows down our ability to pave roads and get some of these problems fixed. So like I don't want this to be an extra barrier to us being able to sort of get caught up on some of these potholes and whatnot. Andy, go ahead.
One thing we've run into, and I think it may be in the definitions of what a public forum is, was that I think the commission tried to put in that at least half of the time must be spent hearing from the public. And in some of these public forums, the public didn't really have a lot to say. They just wanted to hear what was going on. And so it became sort of a comical mathematical problem where everybody sat around for half an hour while the public part ticked off, so that then, you know, the elected folks or weren't monopolizing the time, you know, contrary to the charter. So we may want to look at the definition on that.
Meg?
Just quickly, because it's getting late. Also, apparently the counselors feel they can't comment during the public comment, which means they can't ask clarifying questions, or they just sit there mute, and it just seems it would be helpful to enable a little bit of back and forth for the point of clarifying.
I could be wrong, but I believe that's discussion at the discretion of the chair or in the rules of procedure, not a charter issue. But
that's different from the public forums. That's public comment.
Oh, okay. Then that's different.
No, I was saying that Meg's concern is about public comment.
Okay, that's all I have.
And also, if the counselors at these public forums where they just sit there waiting for the time to go by, could ask questions like, do people have any thoughts about this or that, you know, and invite an exchange so that it's not just this kind of speaking to a blank wall.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense to me.
So I'll just stop sharing. Just on that last point, I just sort of advise the committee just to be a little careful in terms of, I don't think you can legislate charisma. So if someone's not sort of good at running a good meeting, I don't know if you can necessarily craft language to always make that happen. So just sort of. So I'll stop sharing and I'll turn it back over to you. We're going to circulate the memo. I don't know if this particular document is ready to be circulated, but I will check in with Pat about circulating this charter with comments.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your work today, Anthony and Mel. That was a great presentation, and I feel like that was pretty much the most in-depth we've really gotten into these discussions, and I felt that was a productive use of our time, and I really appreciate you all facilitating it. Given the time, do we want to adjourn, or do we want to try to make our way through the rest of the little points on the agenda?
I move we adjourn.
Okay.
I motion to adjourn, or if Andy just said that, I second.
Andy moved, Ken seconded. I'll start voting. Andy?
Yes.
Myself, I'm an aye. Bernie?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Meg?
Yes.
Marcus?
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you so much. Thank
Yes,
you for
from me, I'm still here.
Oh, sorry, Raphael. Didn't see you. Yes. You want to
He's
get
right
out
there
of
in the
here,
middle.
too. Sorry.
He's in the middle square.
Not on mine. He's
On my
he's-
screen, he's off the screen, so I don't know. Anyway, have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.